Hi, I'm Libby Cornish from Decadent Alternatives. Welcome to the second video in my online gluten-free baking classes. In this video, I'd like to focus on some of the properties of wheat flour and Baker's Magic flour and how the differences can affect baking. In particular, I'd like to focus on the ability to absorb water and also absorb fat. But first, I'll recap on the last video. And it basically comes down to this. If we use a flour in a recipe that was designed for another flour, we might have to change the technique or the method to make a similar product. Different flour, different technique, method. And you might think, oh yeah, I've got that. However, most of us have probably learnt how to bake with wheat flour and are familiar with the white flour. If it comes second nature to us, basically, when we use it for baking. You might know how to make, I'm not sure, say a strudel or something like that. And just by the feel of the dough, you'll know whether you need to add in more liquid or more flour. You are basically already biased to technique. So I'd like you to remember different flour, different feel. And to demonstrate this, I thought I'd show you something visual. And hopefully this will highlight the differences in wheat flour and Baker's Magic flour in terms of their ability to absorb water and fat. This is something I don't usually do in my gluten-free baking classes simply because I don't want to spread wheat flour around the classroom. So what I've done is I've sealed in 100 grams of either wheat flour or Baker's Magic gluten-free flour into plastic bags. And then I have added in different amounts of water. So it might be 100 grams of water or 150 grams of water. And I'd like to be able to show you the difference. So to start off, I'll show you the wheat flour. So here we have wheat flour. Simple, white, fine, lovely by itself, and you can see how fine it is. Baker's Magic flour, not so fine, and a little bit darker in colour. So you can already see from the difference in the flours that they're not the same, and that the colour and the texture is not the same. So if we add 100 grams of water, and I'll show you the wheat flour first, you can see that it is really quite pliable and maybe a cake mix like. I show you Baker's Magic with 100 grams of water. That's it. There is no, it's not pliable at all. In fact, is really, really hard. Increasing the water to 150 grams, and you can see your wheat flour is really quite runny. And whereas beside it, or even having an hour looking at your 150 grams of water in your Baker's Magic flour, you can actually see that it is more liquidy, if that is a word, but it is still actually quite solid and totally different from the wheat flour. So most things that you bake will contain water, and that might be in the form of an egg or lemon juice or even milk. And because there is a huge difference in the flour's ability to actually absorb water, this will be reflected in the amount of water that you are going to put, or amount of liquid that you are going to put into a recipe. So, for example, if you are going to bake a loaf of bread with wheat flour and you use 450 grams of flour, you will be putting in about 340 grams of water to that. At the same token, getting to bake a loaf of bread with Baker's Magic flour and 450 grams of flour, so the same amount, you'll actually be putting in about 550 grams of water. So it is a lot, it's considerably more. Now, other recipes or other types of recipes, say, for example, short crust pastry, they will, it's not as simple to determine just the straight, okay, well, this is how much water you put in that, because we use a lot more fat in short crust pastry. And that brings me down to what does the wheat flour and Baker's Magic flour look like when you add in 150 grams of water and 50 grams of oil? I'll show you, the wheat one first. And you can see that a lot of the oil, I don't know how much, but a lot of the oil hasn't actually been absorbed. And interestingly, I think where the water has, where the oil, some of the oil has actually been absorbed by the flour, it's actually pushed water out. So you're getting a double layer there. Now, if you have a look at Baker's Magic flour that has the same amount of oil in it and the same amount of water, you can see that it is pliable, but the oil actually hasn't come out. So with these differences, you would expect that it would have such a huge impact on baked goods. So I've got a question for you. Why do we add fat to baked goods? Well, if we're talking about pastry or cakes, simply because it makes them taste good. Now, cakes have often been described as too dry if they don't have enough fat in them. On the other end of the scale, food is often described as greasy or oily if there's too much fat. Basically, we want a that wonderful midpoint where it's just right. And this is going to be dependent on the flour's ability to actually absorb fat, and a few other things. But so if you are using Baker's Magic flour in a wheat-based recipe, you could pretty much say that you are actually going to have to add in more liquid and a lot more fat to get a similar type of product. And that concludes my second video. Thank you for listening.